Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing really well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. So we're on the final part of our story tonight, which is incredibly exciting. We're about to find out what it is that Boxman Galloway has to reveal to Prudence. Is he going to tell her all about those drawings in crayon that his grandson had done of a Bigfoot? Is he going to reveal whether his grandson, did his grandson have a Bigfoot encounter? We're about to find out. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with part 4 of our story. Mr. Boxman Galloway's story.
It happened a very long time ago, Prudence dear, yet 20 years has gone by in such a flash. They say time goes very fast when you get older, which explains why I'm pretty close to ancient. My rickety old bones feel my age, but not my mind. Too bad they don't exactly match. Your husband Kyle spent a week with me at Oakwood Rise, I think, when he was about 8 years old at the time. He was such an earnest little boy, interested in absolutely everything he was, always asking inquisitive questions like,
"Why is the sky blue, Pops? And why are ladybugs supposed to be so lucky?"
Stuff like that. It was common for him to stay with us over the summer holidays, for a week or two. I know he would drive his mother completely bananas, begging her to let him come and stay with us.
"Please, Mummy, please can I go and stay with Granny and Grandpa? Please, please."
Eventually, after a few days of having to put up with their son's nagging, she would finally relent. I think Kyle's mother, Sheila, was all too happy to finally dump him on us.
"Are you absolutely sure you don't mind having him to stay?"
she would ask us. "He's hard work, let me tell you." Of course we didn't mind. We would say we were proud grandparents, whom delighted in taking care of our grandson. Kyle liked getting away from New York. He loved the countryside, spending lots of time at Oakwood Rise with his grandparents. Naturally, as grandparents, we were delighted in this quintessential opportunity of spending some time with our grandson. We thoroughly enjoyed spoiling him rotten. I mean, that's a grandparent's job, isn't it, to spoil your grandchildren? I'd take him fishing by the creek, or walking our bull mastiff Luna in the woodgrove. Kyle loved Luna when he was a boy. Luna was a massive dog, built like a giant, but had the heart of a marshmallow. He was all slobbery kisses and cuddles, and loved to be the centre of attention. He would always wear a bandana around his neck that my wife would change every day. My wife Olivia would supervise all Kyle's activities to keep him busy during the summer holidays. It's a full-time job, let me tell you, to keep an 8-year-old mischievous boy busy all the time. But my wife was very good with Kyle. She would read to him, help him to paint or draw. They would bake cookies together in the kitchen, and Kyle would end up smeared with chocolate. Sometimes she would take him out on shopping trips, buy him ice cream and sweeties, that sort of thing. One morning Kyle and I went to a pottery studio, run by a very good friend of mine, Mr. Beaufort, so we could learn about how to play with clay and malleably mould it into all kinds of agreeable shapes. I knew kids liked getting their hands dirty and loved messing around with Play-Doh, so I thought it would be fun to have a pottery lesson together. Kyle industriously made a pinch pot by hand and a miniature tortoise, and was terribly proud of himself.
"Look what I made, Pops,"
he boasted. I told him, of course, that his pot was lovely, and Mr. Beaufort praised him generously, telling him he'd never seen an 8-year-old boy make such a good pinch pot before. So Kyle was absolutely thrilled at the lavish praise he received. The pottery studio overlooked a pretty yard that was like something out of a magazine, as Mrs. Beaufort was a talented gardener. Her gardener had many write-ups in magazines at the time, and even an open day for people to visit on occasion, when her garden was open to the public, and any donations that were raised she gave to a donkey sanctuary. Mrs. Beaufort had a thing about donkeys, you see. It was beautiful gardens with hedges of lavender intermingled with all kinds of exquisite flowers. It was during our tea break at the pottery studio that I took Kyle around the garden so that we could admire the plants and the pretty congregations of flowers. There were butterflies and bees pollinating everything. Kyle thought the garden was absolutely spectacular.
"Smell these flowers, Pops,"
he said to me, pointing to these flowers with the most exquisite perfume that I could not identify. I was naturally intrigued by the pungent floral bouquet. I eagerly bent down to smell a flower and felt something stinging my face. I realized I'd been stung by a bee, but I wasn't bothered, even though the sting was only a few centimeters under my eye. Mrs. Beaufort, my friend's wife, was concerned about me. They had a lot of bees in their garden. She had been stung over a handful of times, and had some surprisingly bad reactions to her bee stings, even though she was non-allergic. She told me that it wasn't good my having a bee sting so very close to the eye, especially if it began to swell, because it could potentially close up my eye. "You might need to take an antihistamine," she told me, "and you need to watch the sting very carefully." I told her I wasn't worried about it. I'd been stung before a plethora of times, and had virtually no reaction, so I was certain it would calm down, even though it looked a little red and inflamed. Mrs. Beaufort insisted attending to it with antiseptic. She removed the stinger with a pair of tweezers. I was not going to allow this bee sting of mine to kibosh our plans. I had promised Kyle we would go fishing at the creek later that afternoon. And on the way back to Oakwood Rise in the car, the spirited little Kyle could talk of little else.
"Pups, I'm going to catch the biggest fish you've ever seen in your life,"
he told me proudly. "We'll see about that, Kyle," I teased. "I think my fish will be bigger than yours," I challenged him.
"No, it won't, Pops. Mine will be as big as a whale,"
he said, stretching out his little arms as wide as they would go. I chuckled. "There aren't any fish as big as a whale in the creek, Kyle," I told him. "You'll only find whales in the ocean." Kyle made a face.
"Well, catfish are very, very big, aren't they, Pups? Besides, they've also got whiskers like a cat. I'll catch an enormous catfish, the biggest one you've ever seen. When can we go to the creek, Pops? I want to go now,"
he said eagerly, when we'd arrived at the farmhouse. "We need to have lunch first, Kyle," I told him. "But after lunch we'll go to the creek and fish, I promise you that."
"But I'm not hungry, Pops. I ate cake at the pottery studio. Please can't we go fishing now? Please, Pops, please."
"I'm sure your grandmother has prepared a lovely lunch for the both of us," I told him. "But after lunch I promise you we will go to the creek. Scout's honor," I said, making a solemn salute. I parked my Jeep, Grand Cherokee, in the carport, noticing that my wife's white Hyundai Santa was not there. She told me she was spending the morning at home, so where was she? I entered the house and became very aware it was unusually quiet. I called out my wife's name, but I knew she was not there. There were no smells of any homely, wholesome cooking, wafting from the kitchen, that would normally greet me. All I could hear was the tick of a kitchen clock. I was disappointed. There was no sign of my wife anywhere. At this point I was not feeling too good. My cheek on my right-hand side was burning up. The sting was beginning to throb. It was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. My right eye was closing up, so my vision was flailing.
"Where is Granny?"
asked Kyle, looking disappointed not to see my wife's jolly figure, standing there in the doorway with a broad grin on her face, asking Kyle all about his pottery lesson, as she would likely have done. I knew Kyle, with his ebullient enthusiasm, was bursting to tell his grandmother about the pinch pot he'd made. There was no sign of Luna the dog anywhere, which was also upsetting, so the house felt as flat as champagne without the fizz. "I'm not sure where your granny is," I told him tentatively. "It looks like she's gone out and taken Luna with her. But where? That's the question." I was genuinely rather puzzled and concerned that maybe something had happened to Luna. My wife could have rushed the dog to the vet or something. That was when I noticed a note stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet from my wife.
"Boxman, sorry to leave you love in the lurch like this, but I got a call from Ashley, my sister. She's been in a dreadful car accident. Her car is a complete write-off. They used the jaws of life to get her out of her car. No one can believe that she's still alive, but she's in one piece without a scratch on her body. She's in a right state, though. She could have been killed, Boxman. I think she's suffering from post-traumatic stress after what could have been. She knows it was a close call. I thought I'd go over and see if she's all right. I'm sure she needs some comfort. She's had the once-over in the hospital, but they say she's fine. I'm taking Luna with me. I think Luna will give her some comfort. She loves that dog. I hope you can look after Kyle and make him something for lunch. There's some luncheon meat in the refrigerator and sliced bread in the dispenser. I'll see you early evening when I get back. Keep an eye on little Kyle, will you? Don't let him out of your sight for a moment. Much as I love him, he's a bundle of mischief."
"That is from your grandmother," I told Kyle, replacing the note back on the fridge. "She's taken Luna to see her sister. She'll be back this evening, so it's just the two of us together now. Let's get some lunch sorted before we go to the creek," I said, opening the refrigerator and liberally piling ham onto bread, along with some sliced tomato and mayonnaise. My sandwiches looked like something a kid had thrown together, but it would have to do, and Kyle was not remotely fussy. We sat down together at the kitchen table to eat, and with his mouth full, Kyle appeared to be pointing at my face.
"Pops, your face is so pink, it's growing so very big," he chuckled. "You look like my pet hamster at home. Chunky's got a fat face like yours is right now."
I trotted off to the bathroom to inspect the bee sting, and I found that my eye was closing up. My cheeks looked enormously swollen. But I wasn't very alarmed about it. I simply opened up the kitchen cabinet and found a bottle of antihistamines, popping 2 in my mouth, hoping that they would bring down the swelling. Alas, I didn't consider the fact that these antihistamines were powerful sedatives. Taking 2 was not advised, but I didn't know that at the time. I had failed to read the fine print. You were discouraged from driving after taking these particular antihistamines because they caused drowsiness. I told Kyle we would sit down for a while in the living room for a rest to digest our lunch. Then we would go fishing later at the creek. I suddenly felt incredibly fatigued, very drowsy, almost as if the day was closing in on me. Kyle was not best pleased with me. He began to whine about how he wanted to go fishing.
"Please, Pops, you said we could go after lunch to the creek. Can't we go now? I don't want to rest."
"Just let me have a little rest, Kyle, and then we will go," I assured him. I remembered nothing after that. I drifted into a deep sleep. I completely forgot about my responsibility in taking charge of little Kyle. It was a couple of hours later. I woke up with quite the start, feeling disorientated and confused. The house was unusually quiet. At this point in time, My right eye had fully closed up. I couldn't see anything out of it. My cheek was throbbing furiously, and my first thought that came into my mind was, where was Kyle? I called out his name, but he failed to respond. I suddenly grew grievously concerned, and the words that screamed out in my head were, "The creek! The creek! The creek! He's at the creek!" I knew he wanted to go fishing, and would have been extremely frustrated with my falling fast asleep, and would likely have gone to the creek on his own accord. I began to panic, especially when I saw that there was a chair under the kitchen door, that Kyle had placed there in order to be able to reach the handle of the door. It was swinging on its hinges, suggesting that Kyle had indeed left the house, and I knew he didn't know how to swim, so I began to visibly panic. I couldn't understand why I had drifted off to sleep, but I rocketed like a bullet from the house into the woods at the speed of light, almost as if my entire life depended on it. If anything had happened to Kyle, my wife would never talk to me again, and I would never be able to live with myself. "Kyle!" I screamed out. "Kyle, where are you? Kyle!" My heart was thundering in my chest, with the same fear you would get when being chased by a wild animal. It was a feeling of impending dread. I just knew that Kyle would be at that creek, and I had dreadful, tormenting images of him drowning in the water. My panic escalated when I arrived at the creek. I found Kyle's long fishing net at the edge of the water on the sandy beach that had been brought along with him. He'd brought that along instead of his fishing rod. My blood went icy cold when I observed that the creek was completely quiet, apart from a few willow trees, where the long verdant tentacles were brushing the surface of the water. Beyond that, all was very, very still, and the haunting airiness of this poignant moment stung me to the core. Where the hell was Kyle? I looked beleagueredly at the silvery spread of water before me, and my worst fears tormented my imagination. "Kyle! Kyle!" I screamed. "Where are you?" It was when I saw one of Kyle's sneakers floating on top of the water upside down that I feared the very worst. I ran towards the sneaker, my clothes getting immersed in the water, and I began to scream. I dived under the water, desperately searching for Kyle. I was certain he had drowned. Seeing that shoe floating upside down in the water sent every fear I had in my heart on a roller coaster of absolute terror. I will never forget the fear I felt in that moment. I continued to scream out, making this animalistic sound that I have never since made. I didn't even know I was screaming. I do remember wondering who was making that god-awful noise, like a desperately frightened animal caught in a trap, when I realized that the noise was coming from me. I was in the water, diving beneath the depths, feeling around for Kyle's body, but I found nothing. I climbed out of the freezing water, my body shivering from the cold. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, but it was badly damaged by the water. Damn, I thought. I needed to call for help at once, but even that had been allayed. I was shaking and trembling so much that all reasoning and common sense have left me. And that was when I saw Kyle, walking towards the creek, grinning from ear to ear. In one hand he was holding a couple of very, very large catfish, and in the other hand he was holding a female Bigfoot's hand in his. I was so confounded, but you know what kids are like. For Kyle, holding this Bigfoot's hand was the most natural thing in the world to be doing. But for me, seeing this female Bigfoot walking towards me with my grandson was like being caught up in a wild, fictitious story. I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
"Hello, Pops! I know you couldn't take me fishing 'cause you were fast asleep. Pops, you don't have to worry because Azenka took me fishing and we went fishing and she caught 2 very big catfish, Pops,"
said Kyle, displaying the monstrous fish in his hands very proudly.
Look at this, Pops! Look at the size of these fellows! She can fish, Pops! She doesn't even have to use a fishing rod like you! She's much, much better at you than at fishing! You see, I told you that I would get very big fish! I told you I'd get a very big catfish!
For a moment I was completely lost for words, as if I thought I was a caricature caught up in a cartoon. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mouth dropped open, and it began to open and close like a goldfish. Nothing was coming out. I wanted to rush over to Kyle, hug him with relief, and throttle him at the very same time. I was so angry with him, but so thrilled he was all right.
This is a Zenka, Pops! She's my friend! She's my friend! I met her by the creek! She said I shouldn't be alone, that she would come fishing with me. She said I shouldn't be alone because I can't swim. But I told her that I needed to catch a very big fish and that my net was useless, so she said she'd catch them for me, Pops. And look at this one,
he said, holding it up to show me again. It's a very big fish, I agreed. Very impressive. You're right. I'd never be able to pull in a fish like that. It's a marvellous catch. Kyle looked very pleased by my praise. And Zenka the Bigfoot was female. She was about 8 foot tall, maybe taller, I can't be sure. She was extraordinarily slender, because she was so athletic, and very often athletes have no breasts, so she had no breast tissue at all on her chest. But she was rippled with muscle. She was powerfully strong. Her human-like face was very noble-looking, with a heavily furrowed brow, a flat nose and high cheekbones, and the brightest brown eyes that I've ever seen.
Why were you screaming, Pops?
Asked Kyle, completely immune to how much anxiety he had brought upon me. You, young man, I said, pointing to him with a finger accusingly. You were not supposed to go to the creek unsupervised. I told you we were going to the creek after lunch and that I was having a rest first. But I am very upset, Kyle, that you left the house without waking me up. I don't like it when you wander off on your own like this.
But, Pops, I tried to wake you up, but you were fast asleep. You said we would go to the creek together. Why are you upset? Because Azenka took me fishing. She took me fishing, so you don't have to.
You wonder why I'm upset, Kyle. I'm upset, young man, because you've been a very, very naughty boy. You failed to listen to me. You didn't obey me when I told you not to leave the house. Instead, you went out on your own to the creek, and it's dangerous to do that. You could have drowned, young man. You cannot even swim. It seemed rather strange to be chastising my grandson in front of this female Bigfoot, but she seemed nonchalant about it. Never once did I feel remotely fearful of her. She had a genuinely sweet, non-threatening demeanour. I didn't think she understood a word of what we were saying, but it turns out she comprehended absolutely everything. What happens next still confounds me to this very day. The Bigfoot held my eyes in her gaze. I must say it was quite hypnotic looking into her eyes. She spoke to me in an indigenous language, the likes of such I have never heard before. It downloaded itself into my head in English, so I understood her every word very clearly.
Kila quinasa, dula pikasana, likala sokolo shaka, inita linwa. Don't get upset. I've taken care of this boy for you. He didn't come to any harm. I always keep an eye on the creek when there are young children around. I knew the boy was staying at the house, so I've been watching the creek like a hawk. A little girl drowned in this creek a long time ago. She lived in the house where you are living now. There was much wailing for many weeks, I'm told. My father learnt the story from his father. He told me always to keep an eye on little children, because they often can't swim, and they get up to so much mischief. By the way, my name is Nzenka. It's good to meet you.
Don't be too hard on the boy. He just wanted to go fishing. I caught him a couple of fish. He wanted them to be very big. I obliged his request. But the fish are easy to get, but there's a special technique to grabbing them. I find you have to catch them unaware, and be quick about it too, or they can sneakily slip away. I better get back. I've got a young one that needs feeding.
And with that she nodded and glided away into the woods, while Kyle was left there grinning at me from ear to ear, as if butter would not melt in his mouth. I gave him the biggest telling off of his life. I told him under no circumstances to tell his grandmother about Nzenka.
Why don't you want me to tell her about Nzenka, Pops?
I drew in a deep breath and said gingerly, Your grandmother doesn't like you talking to strangers, that's why. I lied to Kyle. I knew my wife would kill me if she knew I'd fallen asleep while taking charge of our grandson. I thought the cat would come out of the bag when Kyle was drawing pictures of Nzenka and showing them to his grandmother so proudly. Who is this, Kyle? She asked, staring in bewilderment at the pictures he had drawn.
This is Nzenka,
he told her proudly.
These are the 2 fish she caught for me at the creek. She's carrying them. I'm carrying them in my hands. Granny, Nzenka, she's the best fisherman in the whole world. She dives under the water. She grabs the fish, but she caught the catfish for me. She's clever. She says you have to move very quick or they get away 'cause they're very slippery.
Does she now? Said my wife, smiling broadly at Kyle and ruffling up his hair. Nzenka, now that's a nice name. Where did you hear that from? A children's book or something?
She told me her name is Nzenka, silly, said Kyle. It means sea foam.
Does it indeed? Said my wife.
Yes, 'cause sea foam is rich, Granny. It's got lots of minerals that make up all life. Everything comes from the sea. That's what Nzenka says.
Well, this Nzenka sounds like she's very clever because she speaks the truth. Everything does come from the sea. Why did you draw her with so much hair? Why did you make her so large?
'Cause she's got hair all over her body like a bear,
said Kyle, looking exasperated, almost as if he thought his grandmother was really quite stupid. Silly me! Of course she's got lots of hair all over her body. She needs to keep warm, doesn't she? Because she doesn't wear any clothes. My wife thought the pictures that Kyle had drawn were to humour himself. She found they were amusing. She thought her grandson was making up an imaginary friend with lots of hair, and I let her believe that. I remember for days all Kyle could ever talk about was Nzenka. Nzenka this, Nzenka that, Nzenka the next thing. You know how kids can go on and on and on about stuff they're very enthusiastic about. I would stop to ask myself about Nzenka. Had it actually happened? I was stunned that I'd encountered such a remarkably idiosyncratic, highly intelligent creature that had reached out to look after Kyle when she recognized his obvious vulnerability around water. And on top of all that, she caught him 2 very large catfish in the process. So he got the cake with the cherry on it that day, as he had wanted to catch a huge catfish, and the 2 catfish the Bigfoot caught were just magnificent specimens. Never seen fish that size before. I know I needed to nip Kyle's garrulous, unbridled chatter about Nzenka in the bud before it got out of hand, because if he talked too much, I was worried that my negligence would be fully exposed and my wife would likely kill me in the process for falling asleep while watching over her beloved grandson. If she knew a Bigfoot had come to his rescue, I'm not sure how well she would have taken that revelation. It was bad enough that I was more than a little rattled by my own guilt for failing my grandson in the way that I did. I hasten to say that I lost the sight in my right eye for over 3 days after that bee sting, but eventually the swelling went down. I bought Kyle a very expensive bicycle, and then his attention was focused on his new toy, so Nzenka was no longer the topic of conversation,
as he was so distracted by the lovely gift. So my cunning worked. Years later, I realized he had no memory of the Bigfoot that he'd encountered, and I kept stum about it, while my wife was alive, and actually never broached the subject when Kyle became an adult. I mean, what was the point, if he couldn't even remember the event?
This is an incredible story, Boxman. I'm so grateful you shared it with me. I can't believe that Kyle actually saw a Bigfoot and has no memory of it. But what an amazing story. Do you know he still has ants in his pants today when he wants to do something? But he definitely has no memory of Nzenka. Did you ever get to see her again by any chance?
No, I did not, said Boxman sorrowfully. I wish I had, though. Marvellous creature she was. So incredibly human. You can hardly call her a creature, but I suppose that's what you do when you describe a Bigfoot. But to me she was very human, you know. She could read my mind. I was very grateful for what she had done in watching over Kyle that day, in the way she did. I dread to think if something could have happened to poor old Kyle. I did check, of course, all the details concerning the history of our house, and I found that indeed a little girl of about 6 years old called Louisa Patterson had drowned in the creek on our property, in 1853, I believe it was. So the Bigfoot had learned a sobering truth from a long time ago, which was why when Kyle was staying with us, she kept a vigilant watch over the creek to ensure the events of 1853 would never be repeated again.
2 years later, no one had been more delighted than Mrs. McIntyre to hear Prudence's news when she learnt that her daughter was pregnant.
About time too, Prudy dear. I thought you were never going to give me grandchildren, like your 2 sisters have done. So go on, Prude. What is it, love? A girl or a boy? I'm dying to know.
Mum, I have no idea, and I don't want to know either. I want it to be a surprise.
But how can you not want to know, love? You won't know what colour to paint the nursery, or what clothes to purchase for your little girl or boy. Everything will have to be done in yellow or white, because pink is what you get for a girl and blue for a boy. I'm going to get the next flight out, Prudence, love, and I'm going to take you shopping in town. Your dad won't be coming along. He'll be bored out of his skull going shopping. You know what he's like. It's not his idea of a good time. I want to spoil that grandchild of mine before she's even born, and help you decorate that nursery for him or her. We must have everything ready for my grandchild before he or she is born. If you really don't want to know the sex of your child, I think we need to go for a yellow palette. I think sunflowers would be a great theme for the bedroom. It'll be in keeping with the classic look of the house, of Oakfield Rise's age, of course.
Mum, it'll be fantastic if you come here, but I'm just worried about where you will stay, because you hate old houses. Are you going to book into a hotel or something?
Nothing of the kind, my dear. I'm going to have to be a big girl, love. Your father's telling me that. I admit I don't like old houses at all. As far as I'm concerned, there are ghosts everywhere. But I will stay at your place.
Prudence was amazed to hear this, that her mother had actually agreed to spend a few days at Oakwood Rise, even though she hated old houses.
Well, that's just brilliant news, Mum. I can't wait to see you.
Mrs. McIntyre's account.
I've always hated old houses. They quite literally make my stomach squirm. I know they carry within their walls the imprints of the generations long past, and of the people that have lived there, who have woven their threads into the tapestry of this place. I had visited enough old houses to know this is true, so I preferred to abstain from all things old. Oakwood Rise, where my daughter was living, dated back to the early 1800s, so that's a hell of a lot of history behind it, which you definitely feel when you approach the house. When I first visited Oakwood Rise, I was certain that a little girl was watching me on the stairwell, and it gave me the creeps. My modern glass and steel home in Queens never felt ominous like this. Normally when I visit my daughter, as a consequence of my discomfort towards staying at Oakwood Rise, I would usually insist that me and my husband stayed at a hotel while visiting Prudence and Kyle. My husband passionately condemned this outrageously insane practice of mine, saying that I was being incredibly rude. "There's nothing wrong with Oakwood Rise, love," he would tell me. "It's a spectacularly beautiful house, steeped in a rich congenial history. There is nothing menacing about the place that isn't all in your own head, of your own creation. Everyone knows old houses make noises, but your incessant belief that they're all haunted is borderline ridiculous. I'm sorry, love. Prudence and Kyle are having a baby, and if you want to be involved in your grandchild's upbringing, you're going to have to get over your irrational protestation of all things old." I knew my husband spoke words of wisdom, of course. I was loath to admit he was right. Besides, it was going to be terribly impractical for me to stay at a hotel in the future when visiting my grandchild. How would I ever be able to take care of it? I was determined to help my daughter prepare the nursery for the arrival of the upcoming grandchild, so all hands were needed on deck. I didn't sleep very comfortably in the house. The staircase creaked during the night, the pipes groaned and banged, and I would hear other enigmatic noises in the house that I simply could not explain, including the scurry of tiny feet on the landing and a little girl's giggle, and I did hear that very clearly. One of my friends in Queens is a psychic medium. She says I'm just more sensitive to energy than most people, which is why she thinks I actually abhor old houses.
I think you can see things that others can't. That's why you've made it your life's mission to avoid things old, so that you don't have to communicate with anything that might realize that you're more sensitive than most.
When I moved into the spare room at Oakwood Rise, I did have a sense that a little girl was following me around the house like a puppy dog. But I never mentioned any of this to my daughter, lest she would think I was losing my mind. But I felt I could sense a little girl's presence. I'm relatively health conscious, you know. I like to keep myself in reasonably good shape. When I'm at home in Queens, I tend to get up very early in the morning. I take our family boxer George for his morning walks in the Forest Hills barking lot, where there are bicycle trails, park benches and walking trails. People delight in bringing their dogs to this park to socialize with other dogs. I would have enjoyed the pleasure of walking my daughter's two schnauzers, but they were in her bedroom on this morning, and were probably sleeping at the end of her bed, if I know what my daughter's like. They were practically joined to Prudence at the hip, so my walks on the Oakwood Rise property would be relegated to being on my own, without a wagging companion by my side, which was a dreadful pity, but it couldn't be helped. I put on my bright pink jogging tracksuit and sneakers. The moment I saw the signs of an early light twinkling through a crack in the curtains, I was up and about, glad to get away from the heavy oppression of the house. I was heartily relieved the dawn had broken, as I really was beginning to feel rather uncomfortable sleeping in the old house, especially since the doggedly determined presence of the little girl was so pronounced to me. I would wake up from my fitful slumber, bathed in my own perspiration, but the room would become so incredibly cold that I could see my own vaporous breath. I would speak out into the room, even though nobody was there that I could physically see. "Little girl, if you're there, please go away. You need to leave me alone. Don't follow me around the place like a puppy dog." I think she knew I could sense her. She was following me around, I was sure of it. I heard her giggle, as if she was delighting in the fact that I was able to see her. Well, not see her exactly, sense her. I was determined to turn a blind eye to her, in the hope that the impressions that harassed me would finally go away, if I ignored them for long enough. How could my daughter stand living in this dreadful house, like hanging on to the memories of the past like the chapters in an old book that had been written eons ago? In the beginning, my daughter had been rather reticent about moving into Oakwood Rise. It had belonged to Kyle's grandfather, you see. Boxman Galloway, his name is. Ostensibly, Prudence had only ever known the privileges of living a life swaddled by modern comforts. Clean lines, geometric shapes, sheer glass, leather, linen, and chrome. But now she was practically living in a house just completely inebriated by its rich history. I was surprised that within months she had fallen head over heels in love with the place, and developed Kyle's passion for antiques, as if she'd been infected by a contagious, deadly disease. I couldn't understand any of it, of course. I mean, she'd grown up to appreciate all things modern, and now she'd flipped over to a new way of looking at the world, so that even the nursery I was helping her prepare for my grandchild had to be traditionally in keeping with the age of the house. It was a perfectly beautiful morning. Of that I have to admit. I ran across the dew-laden grass, down the long winding trails of the grove, where congregations of tall, lofty, magnificent trees, many of them as old as the house, gathered together in imperial sprawling clusters, like a very imposing army battalion, most dressed in an ensemble of luxurious lush green foliage. There are no words to describe how perfectly lovely it was. The soft ethereal gossamer light that twinkled through the branches of the trees was nothing less than enchanting, made all the more magical by the tuneful trills of the bird song. I stepped up the speed of my walk to get the circulation going and my heart beating vigorously, because it's very good for your health to walk fast, but I prefer not to run. In a trice I knew I was not alone. Someone was watching me. I became very aware of that. I sensed I was being stalked by a clandestine pair of feet. But then I persuaded myself that I was obviously being ridiculous. I scanned my immediate environment, with a cautious scrutiny, of course, but nothing was there. I could hear the whisper of a gentle breeze, and I felt almost a little foolish. I followed the trail a little further, and heard the obstreperous sound of water crashing against the rocks. My daughter had mentioned this delightful creek to me before, and I had fortuitously found it. What were the chances of that? The silvery water gleamed very beautifully in the morning light, reflecting all the crooked willow trees with their gnarled, leaf-laden boughs that were inquisitively peering over the water's edge, like vainglorious green giants, eager to catch a glimpse of their own reflections. I stood there absorbing the tranquil peacefulness that the creek invited, cocooned in the sweet silken blissfulness of this sparkling moment. Once again I was antagonized by prickles of disquiet that trickled down my back. I was hit with this powerful sense of foreboding, that something or someone was watching me. I could feel a pair of unseen eyes boring into the back of my skull, and yet still, even as I looked with a resolute determination for telltale signs of a shadow hiding behind the trees, studying me curiously, I saw nothing. My heart quickened its beat, so it thundered violently in my chest, and a trail of sweat broke out above my lip. The feeling was so strong. All of a sudden, it was almost as if my mind was being filled with all these images from another time in our history, as if a video recording was being replayed in my head. The pictures I was seeing happened around the creek here at Oakwood Rise, long time ago, although it looked different. The tree growth that fringed the creek was not as old as it was now, and that was when I saw a fresh-faced little girl, of no more than 6 years old. She was peering curiously over the water's edge. She was wearing a long white dress with a full-bodied skirt that trailed to her feet, almost as if the white material was a foot longer than she actually was. Her blonde hair was tied back into 2 braids to make one ponytail. I've never seen a hairstyle like that before, but it was very becoming. That was when I saw a large frog in the water, with his white side fully exposed, as if the frog was swimming upside down, exposing his underbelly. The little girl's face was driven with great excitement as she watched the frog in abject fascination. She threw her arms around across the water in a futile attempt to catch the frog. She began crying out, "Froggy! Froggy! Froggy Frog!" She leaned over the water's edge, desperately trying to catch the frog. But she lost her balance rather precariously and fell into the water. Crying out, she struggled, and with a few frantic gasps splashing around in the water, she sank beneath its depths, like a small stone being plunged into the water. Everything went airily still. Of course, I wanted to rush out to help this poor wretched little girl, but I knew I couldn't, as the events being relayed to me in some bizarre way had happened an awfully long time ago. It was a while later that the body of the little girl appeared to resurface, floating on the water upside down. She was not moving. She looked like a fragile porcelain doll. Poor thing. I could hear the rustle of woman's long skirts, a voice trailing through the trees, as she called out her daughter's name. "Louisa! Louisa! Louisa! Where are you? Where are you?" The woman that I guessed at once must be the child's mother ran up to the creek. When she saw her daughter floating head-side down in the water, she let out an ear-piercing, shrill, very distraught scream. Her skirts were lifted up. She dashed straight into the water, with shoes and everything else. And then she rushed towards her daughter's motionless body, turning her daughter around so that the face was exposed to her. She pulled her daughter to her chest and hurried out of the creek, laying her on the ground, shaking her child's body, slapping her cheeks. "Wake up! Wake up, Louisa! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" She pressed her hands down on her daughter's chest to expunge the water, hoping that her daughter would suddenly start sputtering and spitting out water. But nothing happened. The child failed to respond. The little girl was obviously dead. The mother began to howl when she realized her daughter wasn't waking up. In that moment the vision dissipated from my mind, almost like when a movie comes to an end. Like a cloud of smoke, you could say. After the vision faded, I looked up in my astonishment to see a female Bigfoot standing at the edge of the creek, looking directly at me. I didn't even believe these things were real until I actually physically saw one. But there was no doubt what I was seeing. It was then that I realized the images of the little girl who had drowned in the creek in the 1800s had been downloaded in my mind by this Bigfoot, who had shown me what had happened all those long years ago in my mind. Why she did this I couldn't fathom. There must have been a purpose in this madness. I even felt the mother's grief when she discovered her drowned daughter. For a moment it almost was as if I became her. The experience was paradoxically bizarre, that even physically seeing the Bigfoot standing there looking at me seemed to become oddly normal in my current rather peculiar reality, that had stretched my paradigm of the world like a large elastic all-encompassing band. The Bigfoot pointed to what I know was now a ghost child. She looked identical to her original form, that had drowned in the water, only this time she appeared very much alive, but of course she was dead. I wondered if this was the girl that had been following me around my daughter's house. The little girl was running around the creek, crying out for her mother.
"Mummy! Mummy! Where are you, Mummy?"
What happened next rattled me to the core. I can't even explain this, but I'm going to tell you the story anyway. The Bigfoot was looking straight into my eyes. Try as I might to look away and to avert her gaze, I just could not. It was almost like I was hypnotized by her. Then the most outlandish thing happened. She communicated to me through a telepathic kind of exchange.
"This little girl's been waiting for someone like you to come here. You have the gift of sensing spirit. This little girl needs your help. She's looking for her mother."
That was when I noticed the mother standing at the creek, calling out her daughter's name. But the little girl failed to see her mother. "Louisa! Louisa! Louisa, come here!" came the mother's rather frantic calls. But the little girl didn't hear her mother's cries. "Hello, Louisa," I called out to the little girl. She turned around and saw me at once, and cried out to me,
"I want my Mummy. I can't find her. Please help me find my Mummy. I've been following you. I've been asking you to help me
then looked at the little girl and pointed to her mother. "She's over there, my dear," I said. "She's been calling you for a very long time, but I don't think you've seen her. Go to her. She's waiting for you." The little girl followed my gesture. Her face lit up when she saw her mother standing there, breaking out into a joyful smile. She cried out, "Mummy! Mummy!" The two of them were reunited in a very big bear hug. The mother, holding her daughter's hand, looked up at me for a moment and nodded her thanks, and then just disappeared and was gone, like that. I was so profoundly moved by the experience that I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I knew the mother had taken her daughter to the light, and it had been a privilege to point out the way to the little girl. The female Bigfoot was talking to me with very bright, warm eyes. "Well done," she said to me. "I knew you could do it. I was waiting for the right person to come here to help this little girl, and here you are. Why do you try to fight this ability of yours? You should embrace it. Not many of your kind are blessed with it. You shouldn't run away from it like you obviously do." "I didn't think I had a gift," I said. I do sense things others don't, which is why I avoid everything steeped in history. I can't stand it." I found myself talking to this Bigfoot as if it was the most natural thing in the world to do. "I don't understand," I asked the Bigfoot, "why her mother was standing right there and the little girl didn't see her." "Because," said the Bigfoot. "It's very simple," said the Bigfoot. "Sometimes you don't see what is standing right in front of you. Your kind are very good at doing that all the time. It happens a lot in the spirit world. Sometimes they don't even know they're dead. The little girl was very confused. She's been looking for her mother for years and years, but her sense of time is very different to yours. It may feel to her that she's been only looking for her mother for a short time, but for you, it's been a long, long time. She needed a helping hand. You were the one she was hoping would take her to her mother. Spirit can sense when someone knows that they're there, even if that person cannot physically see them. This little girl followed you from the house straight into the woods. She knew you were the one that would be able to help her. I intervened by showing you a memory of what had happened here a long, long time ago at this creek. Trauma leaves its impression on the environment, and if you're sensitive enough, you can tune into the event and play it back in your mind to see what happened here. I can do that very easily. Your kind, not so much. The Bigfoot nodded at me and said to me, "My name is Zenka, by the way. That big man that lives in the house, I've known him since he was a little boy, but he has no memory of me anymore. But I look forward to the little boy his partner is carrying, soon to be born in that household. But I'm going to have my work cut out from me, watching that creek to make absolutely certain that what happened to that little girl can never ever be repeated again. It's been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for helping that little girl," she said, nodding at me, and then she glided away. I knew what my next port of call was. It would be a trip to town to buy blue clothes for my little grandson. I wouldn't tell my daughter Prudence, of course, why I had a hunch that the baby she was carrying was a boy. But she'd be very impressed when I got it right. Although, of course, I would not divulge who revealed this information to me. Well, not yet, anyway. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Loved every minute of it. Thank you very much. Until next time, goodbye and good night.